Yeah, so bringing the evolved body scanners in as both a preventative and a deterrent was very significant. And that doesn't solve the issue of the culture of the schools because it doesn't change the behavior and conduct of students in terms of it being a safe school in every possible respect. So it's easy and tragic when we're measuring guns identified on campus. Safety does not end at whether there's a gun on the campus or not. Safety comes in so many different forms, and it's critical that we address all of those by way of addressing our educational environment in the schoolhouse. Again, I think addressing this, the educational environment, is where we have to be. And that's about setting expectations. You'll hear a theme through these answers because I think it is so core to what we do and who we are in terms of setting high expectations for conduct and behavior, for respect for individuals and self. And so from that perspective, the way that you address the core issues around the educational environment and the safety associated with it is by setting those expectations of each of our students and holding them to account. The issue is broad, and once again, it is down to the culture of our communities. So how do we engage the community leaders? We used to talk about communities being led by elders. Where are the elders speaking out against this and really driving the cultural change that's necessary to respect life in every form, every facet, all the time? And that is an issue that we are facing as a society globally. And so we're not going to solve it by just looking at schools. We have to engage locally with each of our community partners, both governmental and non-governmental, to drive a narrative that says we expect more of our youth and we're going to enable and empower them to be all that they can be in every way, shape, and form. And that's going to start, once again, with respect for your peers and yourself. So there is not very much that is actually in the board's control, with the exception that what we need to do as a board is set the expectations and then be open to ideas from staff to say this is what we need. If you look at our shortages, I was at Palisades High School yesterday for the ribbon cutting, and we were having just this conversation. I mean, there was a Math 3 teacher that was just starting, just now, right? Again, we've got 300 odd openings still. And those are teacher openings, never mind the fact that half of our positions are not actually in the schools. And so from that perspective, when you get into a question of how do we solve for this, the labor participation rate is low, and so is the unemployment rate. Every industry is being impacted by this. And as such, what we need to do is figure out what sort of incentives need to be in place in order to recruit the best and brightest for our kids. And to your point, those incentives have to be broader than just a conversation about pay. When you look at our exit interview information, the exit interview information does not say everybody's leaving because of pay. In fact, just the opposite. You know, the anecdotal evidence that you shared said, look, yeah, sure, it'd be great to be paid more, but that's not why I'm leaving. People aren't leaving our schools to go to adjacent counties because they get paid more, because they don't. And so if they're taking a position in this state at an adjacent county, it's not because they want to get paid more, because they don't. And so we've got to solve for those contributing factors, much of which is that back to that educational environment. Once again, you have to set the culture at the board level. You have to have the conversation that says, look, this just is not good enough. You're never going to have a high-performing organization unless you set high expectations, you drive transparency, and you deliver accountability and incentives and rewards. And so from that perspective, that's true for the students and their conduct that we talked about. It's true for the teaching staff and every other staff member that that we are so honored to serve all these students in Mecklenburg County. And so the board has to set that direction and that culture. We own it. We've been fortunate to have an interim superintendent that's come in that's helped to start to drive some of that. Two things. Number one, it shouldn't be the sole responsibility of the CEO. We own it as a board. And number two, he's an interim superintendent. So is it going to snap back the day he leaves? I mean, we have to set the direction and the culture of this organization. And any high-performing organization has characteristics like high expectations, transparency, accountability, incentives, rewards, and we have to set that. And that doesn't mean that we set all the policies. We set the expectations with our staff to set that up, working with our superintendent, with our general counsel, with our chief compliance officer, and with the superintendent's HR office. Yeah, it's the most important hire we make, right? So we've talked about how the board sets the culture and direction for the district in terms of our goals, our objectives. We need to hire somebody who is able to be supported by the board and the community to focus on delivering on our mission and the goals that we set. This board has lowered and narrowed the goals, and that's an issue. It creates additional focus, but the issue is that we create additional focus at the expense of. And so the next leader that we hire, the CEO for a $2.2 billion enterprise, is going to have to come in and be able to lead the organization in a way and in a direction that we start and end every conversation with what's in the best interest of kids. Because that's what we must do as a board. That's what our CEO or superintendent needs to do to ensure that we are focused in the area we need to focus, which is educating and preparing kids for their future. That's a great question, and I haven't considered what those questions are. Generally, as a board, we put together that question set. I'll reflect on the last hire that we made at this level, not as asking Hugh to come back as interim, but when we hired our chief compliance officer. The question that was posed was, can you define a culture of compliance and its linkage to a culture of accountability? Now, our chief compliance officer owns the creation of a culture of compliance. That can't be done without a culture of accountability. The culture of accountability has to be set by the CEO. And again, that is not just wrapping, people on the hand and the wrist when they step out of line. That is a culture of high performance that incents and rewards performance, but also holds people to account when they are not performing or they're not compliant. And so I'm very interested in how our next leader, our next CEO, is going to establish said culture, because it's absolutely critical for the success of this district and every student within it. Yeah, so I've been a big proponent of looking at each of those, right? And so at the end of the day, I'm a father, and I've got to make the best decisions for my kids. And the same thing is true for every parent or guardian in Mecklenburg County. And when people make educational decisions, who is going to be their education services partner and provider, then we need to be in a position where they're choosing CMS. And proficiency measures a great deal about the student that walks into a school, and to an extent what the school is able to do with that student in terms of having them fulfill their full potential. Growth really measures that ability for a student to grow academically as supported and enabled by the school and the home. And so from that perspective, I think growth is very important. It effectively measures when you're looking at disaggregated growth. Let's be clear. When you're looking at disaggregated growth, whether that student would be better off in that school with that teacher or in another school with another teacher, whether that's in the county or out of the county. And so because they're measured against their academic cohort, growth is really important. And when you have high growth schools, particularly looking at the disaggregated data, then that is very good information for parents to make their educational choices by offering the best product. I mean, that is very clear that as a father, and every parent and guardian has to make the educational choices or choices with regards to educational partners. And so from that perspective, when we put the best product out, then parents and guardians are confident that their best choice would be with CMS as opposed to a charter or homeschooling or a private school. And so we can't get away from the fact that those are options that every parent and guardian in this county has. And as such, I want to make sure that we are absolutely providing the best product. And the best measure of that we've completely abandoned, which is market share. And so market share back in 2018 when we set our goals was actually on the radar. So you're talking about how the enrollment is growing. Obviously the enrollment has fallen in CMS. So the enrollment is growing in other educational choices because parents and guardians are making those choices. How do we reverse that trend? We reverse that trend by putting the best product out there. We have the best educational environment in our schools. We have the best teachers in our classrooms. We have the best demonstrated performance through both proficiency and growth. And when we do that, then parents and guardians will choose CMS. If we don't do it, they will continue to flee CMS for other educational options.